Welcome back, everyone. We're diving deep today into Mandate for Leadership, the Conservative Promise.
Oh yeah, this one, it's a quite a title.
It is right. Bold. But, this book's got a kind of legacy.
Mm.
Think back to the Reagan years, early 80s. The first version of this book, it was huge.
Yeah, it was.
Tons of its ideas actually made it into
It
policy.
did.
And this new updated version, it's aiming to do the same thing, but for the next conservative president.
It really is kind of like a blueprint for where they see American conservatism going.
Potential roadmap, yeah.
Yeah, and the authors here, Jennifer Hazelton and Karen Kerrigan.
They're not just theorists.
Oh, no. They've been in the trenches. Like Hazelton, she worked in the Defense Department, USAI,
Wow.
even did some journalism, both CNN and Fox News.
So she's seen both sides.
She has.
And then there's Kerrigan. She's the CEO of the Small Business and Entrepreneurship Council.
Right, so advocating for small businesses,
Yeah.
that's been her life for years.
Yeah, they're heavy hitters, policy-wise.
Absolutely. And their main argument, something you hear a lot in conservative circles,
Mm.
got to curb the power of the federal government.
Yeah.
They think the bureaucracy, it's just gotten way too big, way too powerful.
So much power in Washington.
Too much power, yeah. Time to shift some of that back to the states, back to the people.
So shrink the size of the federal government, more power to local communities.
Exactly. Decisions get made better, they argue, closer to the people they affect.
Okay, makes sense.
Now, one of the most interesting parts of the book for me, it was the section on family and culture.
Okay, so I would have thought tax breaks for families or changing welfare.
You think so,
The
right?
typical conservative stuff.
Standard playbook. But they go deeper.
Okay, I'm listening.
They actually suggest, and this is pretty bold, using government power,
Mm.
maybe even tax incentives, to strengthen families, even encourage people to have more kids.
Wow, that's a big statement. So they're really saying the government should be promoting families actively.
They are. It gets to the heart of what worries them,
Yeah.
declining family values,
Hmm.
and how that impacts the whole country.
So strong families, strong nation.
That's the idea.
Okay.
Now, beyond the big picture stuff, they get really practical, like how should a conservative president run the White House? Staffing, strategy, all that.
Okay, so an actual playbook for governing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They really stress having a strong White House counsel, not just some lawyer reacting to problems, but someone who's helping the president achieve his goals proactively.
Right.
Then there's the Office of Public Liaison.
Remind me what that is again?
They're the bridge between the White House and all the different interest groups out there.
Oh, right, right. So kind of like diplomacy, but within your own administration.
Yeah, exactly. Got to keep everyone happy. And then there's the financial regulatory agencies. They're very clear about those. The president should only appoint people who agree with his economic philosophy.
Makes sense. Got to have your team on board.
Absolutely.
All right, let's shift gears a bit. What about national security?
Big one, right. This is where they really get into the nitty-gritty, especially when it comes to defense. No mincing words here. China, they say, is the top priority for U.S. defense planning. They see China's ambitions as a direct threat to American power. And to counter that, modernize and expand the U.S. nuclear arsenal.
Wow, they're going all in.
Yeah, that's a big statement for sure. But they're not just about military might. They also want to see our allies step up.
Sharing the burden.
Right. They say America can't be the world's policeman forever. Our allies need to contribute more, take on more responsibility for regional threats. Like in Europe, they think Germany needs to do more to counter Russia.
Mm.
And in the Middle East, they want to see regional powers containing Iran.
Interesting. So if you want peace, prepare for war kind of thinking.
In a way, yeah.
Have to-
But there's an economic side to it, too. They emphasize bringing manufacturing back to the U.S., especially for defense.
Buy American, right.
Exactly. Boost domestic production, create jobs. They see a strong American industry as key to our prosperity and independence.
Okay. And what about our military itself? Like recruitment, training, any big ideas there?
They do. They want better access for military recruiters to high schools. And they even suggest requiring all students in federally funded schools to take the ASVAB.
The military aptitude test, right. So
Mhm.
trying to expand the pool of potential recruits.
Exactly. But they also want to maintain what they call standards of lethality and excellence. They say the military should eliminate exceptions for pre-existing medical conditions.
Okay.
And fitness standards should be based strictly on what the job requires, not on things like gender or race.
I can see that being a bit controversial.
For sure. It's a very traditional view of military readiness. Some might say it's outdated, but they argue it's necessary to keep the U.S. military the strongest in the world.
Hmm.
And one last thing on defense. They recognize how important cybersecurity is becoming. They want stronger cyber defenses. And they even suggest maybe we need to rethink how the NSA and U.S. Cyber Command are structured. Those agencies that handle all the signals, intelligence, and cyber warfare.
So they're saying the battlefields of the future might not be physical ones?
Exactly. Cybersecurity, they argue. That's a critical part of national defense now.
So from the White House to China to cyber warfare, they've got a whole plan. But what about those big government agencies, the ones that seem to have a hand in everything?
Oh, yeah. That's where things get really interesting and controversial.
Okay, I'm ready.
Starting with the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, as they call it.
The folks who handle immigration, disaster response, all that, right?
Right, all that. And get this, the authors actually suggest that DHS might need to be downsized significantly
Hmm.
or even eliminated completely.
Well, hold on. They want to get rid of the entire Department of Homeland Security?
They do. It's a
Hmm.
radical idea. But their argument is DHS has just gotten too big, too bureaucratic, and ultimately ineffective. They think its core functions could be done better by smaller, more focused agencies.
So it's all about streamlining the government, less bureaucracy.
Exactly. They see DHS as this prime example of government overreach, and they think it's time to rethink its whole role.
Okay, so even if DHS isn't completely dismantled, what do they want to change?
Well, they start with USCIS. That's the agency that handles immigration services, like green cards, citizenship applications.
Right, right.
They argue that USCIS has strayed from its original mission, which was screening and vetting immigrants. They say it's become an open borders agency, basically helping illegal immigration.
Okay, so they want to make it harder for people to come to the U.S.
Their focus is on making sure immigration is legal and controlled. They want USCIS to go back to carefully vetting applicants and really enforcing immigration laws.
Okay, and what about ICE, the agency that actually enforces those laws inside the U.S.?
They're very clear about ICE. They want it fully empowered to enforce immigration laws, use all the detention space they have, limit those alternative to detention programs.
So basically, a much tougher stance on immigration enforcement.
Yes, they want to send a strong message, no tolerance for illegal immigration. Now, beyond immigration, they also target FEMA, the agency that handles disaster response. Remember we talked about federalism earlier?
Yeah, power to the states.
Right, they want to apply that to disaster preparedness too.
So FEMA shouldn't be the go-to for every hurricane or earthquake, more responsibility at the state and local level.
Exactly. They argue local communities, they're often better equipped to handle smaller disasters. FEMA should focus on the really catastrophic events, the ones that need a national response. Streamlines government, empowers communities to take care of themselves.
That's interesting. What about the Coast Guard and the Secret Service? Those are part of DHS too, right?
They do have some ideas for them.
Yeah.
For the Coast Guard, they say scale back its mission, align it with what Congress is actually giving it money for. They think the Coast Guard's taken on too much, spreading itself too thin.
Makes sense.
And for the Secret Service, back to basics. Protecting the president and other VIPs. They even suggest maybe separating out its financial investigations. Let other agencies handle that.
So again, streamline, get rid of redundancy, make these agencies more focused. But what about foreign policy? How do they see America's role in the world?
Well, that's where the State Department comes in, and they have some pretty strong opinions there. First, they want a reassessment of all the treaty negotiations that are going on.
Like hit the pause button.
Basically, yeah. See if these agreements are actually good for America.
Oh, okay.
They also want to stop enforcing any treaties that haven't been ratified by the Senate.
Why is that?
They say it undermines the Constitution's checks and balances. Too much power for the president, not enough oversight.
So they're worried about presidential overreach on foreign policy.
Absolutely. They want the Senate to have a stronger role.
Okay.
Now, in terms of specific regions, they really highlight India. They want stronger security and economic ties with India.
So India is key to countering China in Asia.
That's their thinking. But they're also realistic about places like Afghanistan and Pakistan. They want to be cautious with the Taliban and with Pakistan's military rule, recognizing those are tough situations, no easy solutions.
So a more pragmatic approach to foreign policy, acknowledging that not everything can be fixed quickly.
Right. Now let's talk about the intelligence community. They play a huge role in national security these days.
For sure.
And the book acknowledges public trust in the intelligence community, it's taken a hit. All those scandals, the talk about abuses of power, it's hurt their image. So they call for holding people accountable when they do wrong and getting the focus back on emerging threats like China and Russia.
So back to basics, rebuild trust.
Exactly. They want more transparency, more accountability from the intelligence agencies. And they specifically highlight the Director of National Intelligence. They say the position needs more authority, more oversight over agencies like the CIA.
So it's like they think the CIA has been operating a little too independently.
Yeah, a bit rogue. They want its activities scrutinized, and they want its operations to always align with State Department policy. They also want to rethink who we share intelligence with, maybe expand that to include partners like the Quad, the U.S., Japan, Australia, and India.
Strengthen numbers, right?
Hmm.
Sharing information to counter those shared threats.
Exactly. And they want to give the National Counterintelligence and Security Center more power, NCSC for short. Let them coordinate counterintelligence efforts across the government.
So everyone's on the same page, especially when it comes to something as sensitive as counterintelligence.
Right, no cross wires. And for cybersecurity, they want to be more proactive. Share declassified intelligence with private companies, stuff they can actually use. They get it. In today's world, you need government and industry working together to make cybersecurity work.
So it's not just about building walls, it's about sharing information, working together.
Exactly, a shared responsibility. Now, they also have some ideas for those agencies that focus on technology and innovation. Agencies like IRRPA and the S&T, they should be tackling the really tough technology problems, they say, not duplicating what the private sector is already doing.
So making sure the government's focusing on where it can make a real difference.
Right, be a catalyst for innovation, not a competitor.
Okay, so defense, foreign policy, intelligence, even cybersecurity, we've covered a lot. But what about media and foreign aid?
Yeah, good points. When it comes to media, they really focus on the U.S. Agency for Global Media, USAGM. They oversee all those government-funded media outlets like Voice of America, Radio Free Europe.
Oh, right, the ones that broadcast American news and perspectives to the rest of the world.
Exactly. And the authors are worried. They say USAGM has some serious security vulnerabilities, could be susceptible to foreign influence, maybe even manipulation by our adversaries.
So foreign governments could use USAGM to spread propaganda.
That's one concern. They also want to make sure USAGM's content meets high journalistic standards, avoids any bias.
So presenting a fair and balanced view of America, not pushing a political agenda.
Exactly. Protect the credibility of U.S. government-funded media.
Okay, makes sense. Now, what about foreign aid? How do they see America's role in helping other countries?
They focus on USAI, the agency that handles billions of dollars in foreign aid every year. They want a renewed focus on healthcare, support for women and children and families, and they really emphasize alternatives to abortion.
So a more humanitarian approach, focused on the well-being of families and communities.
That's it. They also want to partner with faith-based organizations and prioritize working with ethnic and religious minorities.
Interesting.
They say those groups are often overlooked by traditional aid programs, and strategically, they want to use aid to counter China's influence in the Pacific Islands, those vulnerable nations that China's been courting.
Right, so they see foreign aid not just as charity, but also as a tool to advance American interests and counter China.
Absolutely. They believe foreign aid should be used strategically, promote American values and interests.
Wow, we've covered a lot here. National security, foreign policy, media, foreign aid. It's a really comprehensive vision for how a conservative government should work.
It is, and we haven't even gotten to the domestic issues yet. Things like healthcare, education, the
I'm sure.
environment.
Oh, those are the big ones, always front and center in American politics.
Exactly. And that's where things get even more controversial.
All right, I'm ready. Let's dive in. Okay, so let's dive into those hot button domestic issues. Healthcare first. What kind of changes do they have in mind for HHS?
The Department of Health and Human Services, I mean.
Big
Well,
department.
right. Everything from Medicare to the FDA.
Oh, yeah, huge. And they go right for some of the biggest targets within HHS. The CDC, the NIH, the National Institutes of Health.
Those are like household names, those agencies.
They are. And the authors. They accuse them of being politicized, having conflicts of interest, even promoting bad science.
Wow, those are some serious accusations. What specifically are they worried about? Well, they want to cut off funding for certain types of research, things they consider controversial, like fetal tissue research and gain-of-function research, where they manipulate viruses
Oh, yeah, those are definitely hot button topics.
big time. And it's not just research. They also get into the culture war stuff, like transgender issues.
I was wondering if they'd touch on that.
They do. Big advocates for what they call conscience rights, basically protecting healthcare providers who object to doing certain procedures, for religious or moral reasons. And they're pushing back against what they call junk gender science.
So yeah, right in the middle of those culture war battles. Okay, let's move on maybe to something less controversial. How about the Department of Agriculture? What's their plan there?
They're pretty clear. Farmers know best. Get the government out of their way, let them do their thing.
Less regulation, more freedom for farmers. Sounds pretty classic conservative.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
They argue that a hands-off approach, that's how you get the best food. Abundant, safe, affordable. But there are a couple of specific programs they target.
Okay, like what?
Well, one is the Conservation Reserve Program, the CRP. You know the idea, pay farmers to leave some land unplanted.
Yeah, it's supposed to be good for the soil, the environment, right?
That's the idea. But with all the worries about food shortages these days, they think we need to rethink that. Maybe we need all that land-producing food.
So food security over environmental concerns in this case.
Yeah, and they also don't like conservation easements, those agreements that restrict what you can do with your land to protect the environment. They say those can tie the hands of future generations.
It's a property rights argument, basically.
It is, yeah. Landowners should decide how their land gets used, even if that means developing it.
Okay, shaking things up at the USDA. Now, how about education? Always a big one. What's their plan for the Department of Education?
Big idea there. School choice. Parents should decide where their kids go to school, no matter where they live or how much money they make.
So vouchers, charter schools, that whole debate.
That's it. Let the money follow the child, they say. Public school, private school, charter school, whatever's the best fit.
That's a pretty big change from how most schools are funded now.
Oh.
And what about all those federal regulations? Testing, curriculum, special ed, all that. Are they keeping all that?
Oh, they want to roll back a lot of that. They see most of it as just red tape, making things harder, not better.
So deregulation for education is the goal.
Big time. More flexibility for states and local school districts.
Mm.
They're especially focused on the rules for charter schools. Those are way too strict, strangling innovation. And they want less data collection on civil rights, streamline the rules for student loans, Title IX, special ed, you name it.
Wow, they're really going for it. Sounds like they want to totally change how the federal government deals with education.
Yep. They think education should be mostly a state and local issue. The feds have gotten too involved.
And they're big on parental rights in education too, right?
Huge on that. Parents have the final say. They say no government interference. They even want to turn those federally run schools, like in D.C. or on military bases, tribal lands, they want those to become models of school choice. Give parents there the same options as everyone else.
Okay, so big changes for education. Now, how about the Department of Energy? What's their plan to keep America powered up?
They have some interesting ideas about energy innovation, especially the role of the national labs, all those big research centers. They say those labs, they should focus on the basic science, the fundamental stuff. Leave the technology development to the private sector.
So let businesses figure out how to turn those discoveries into actual products and services.
Exactly. They don't think the government's very good at picking winners and losers in the energy market, and they think when the government tries, it just messes things up.
So a hands-off approach to energy innovation, basically. But what about those big, messy problems like nuclear waste?
They know it's a problem. They want to keep cleaning up the waste from old nuclear weapons programs. But they also want to see if private companies can come up with better solutions, more innovative, cheaper.
To bring in the private sector to solve those tough problems. That seems to be a theme here.
It is. They think private companies are often just better at this stuff, more efficient, more creative.
Okay, what about all those renewable energy sources? Wind, solar, geothermal, everyone's talking about those. Where do they stand?
They're actually pretty critical of the government programs that support those. They see them as just handouts, subsidies for favored companies.
Picking winners and losers, they'd say.
Exactly. And they think it hurts consumers in the end.
So a truly free market for energy, let the best technology win.
That's the goal. They even want to reform FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, make it focus on energy that's reliable and affordable. Make sure things like natural gas and nuclear power, the ones you can turn on and off when you need them, make sure those are valued fairly. And they want to limit FERC's power over natural gas pipelines. They think that's too much government control.
So a more streamlined, market-based approach to energy regulation. What about nuclear power itself? Seems like that's making a comeback these days.
Oh, yeah, they're big fans of nuclear. Safe, reliable, doesn't produce greenhouse gases. They think it should be a big part of our energy mix. They want to reform the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the NRC, make it faster and easier to get licenses for new reactors, and streamline the whole process.
So cut through the red tape, make it easier to build nuclear plants in the U.S.
Exactly. They see it as key to energy independence and a way to cut those emissions.
Mm.
Now, switching gears a bit, what about the EPA? The Environmental Protection Agency, always a controversial one. They think the EPA's gotten off track. Too focused on politics, too much regulation, not enough focus on its core mission, which is protecting people and the environment.
So back to basics for the EPA. How would that actually work?
Well, for starters, they want to change how the EPA spends its money. Cut funding for what they call unauthorized science, make sure all the science they use is transparent, other people can reproduce it.
Makes sense.
They're also worried about those EPA advisory committees. They say they're often biased, stacked with people who share the same political views. They want more balance, make sure decisions are based on good science, not politics.
So a more scientific, less ideological EPA.
That's it. More transparent, more accountable, and really focused on its core mission.
Okay, so healthcare, agriculture, education, energy, the environment. We've hit a lot of those big domestic policy areas. But what about law enforcement, the justice system? What kind of vision do they have for the DOJ, the Department of Justice?
They've got some strong feelings about the FBI, especially. They think the FBI should focus on its core mission, law enforcement. They've taken on too much other stuff, and they want to cut that back.
Mission creep, they'd call it.
Yeah, that's it. They're especially worried about the FBI getting involved in fighting misinformation. They say that's basically censorship, a threat to free speech.
So they don't want the FBI to be the thought police.
Exactly. A clear separation between law enforcement and trying to control what people say or think.
So a strong defense of free speech, keep the FBI out of online content moderation.
That's right. They think the government shouldn't be deciding what's true or false. The best way to fight bad information is with more speech, more debate, more ideas. Now, they also want to stop the DOJ from making those settlement payments to third parties.
What do you mean by that?
When the government settles a lawsuit, sometimes they'll pay money to outside groups.
Okay.
The authors think that often benefits political allies, not the actual victims.
So they want to make sure settlement money goes to the people who were actually harmed, not to special interests.
Right. And they want the DOJ to be a strong defender of the Constitution and the laws passed by Congress, the administration's regulations. Be a neutral defender of the law, not a political tool.
Uphold the rule of law, keep politics out of the justice system.
Exactly. The DOJ should be above politics, they say. Treat everyone fairly and equally under the law.
Okay, so a more limited DOJ, less political, more focused on its core mission. What about immigration enforcement? We talked about their plans for DHS, but what about the role of federal prosecutors, the U.S. attorneys?
They want to see those attorneys prioritize immigration cases, really go after those offenses. They think the current administration's been too soft on immigration, and they want to send a clear message. Illegal immigration won't be tolerated.
So a much tougher stance on immigration across the board, from DHS to the DOJ.
Yes. Border security, immigration enforcement, those are key to national security, they say.
Okay, so we've talked about healthcare, education, the environment, law enforcement. It's clear they've got a whole plan for domestic policy. But we haven't talked much about the economy yet. What's their vision for economic growth and prosperity?
That's where things get really interesting, especially when we get to the Department of Labor, how the government regulates the workplace.
Okay, let's talk about that. What do they see as the future of work in America?
Well, they start with the gig economy. All those independent contractors, Uber drivers, freelance writers, all those folks.
The gig economy's been growing like crazy, lots of debate about how to regulate it. Where do they stand?
They're big defenders of the gig economy. They don't want to see those workers reclassified as employees. They think that would be a disaster, stifle innovation, hurt worker flexibility, bad for everyone.
So they see it as a positive thing. More freedom, more flexibility for workers.
Exactly. And for businesses, too, they can adapt more quickly to changes in the market.
Okay, what about ESG? You know, that whole thing about companies considering environmental, social, and governance factors when they invest?
Oh, they hate that. They see it as just pushing a political agenda instead of trying to make money for investors. Yeah. They want to get all that ESG stuff out of ERISA, the law that governs retirement plans.
So keep politics out of investing.
Absolutely. Investment decisions should be about one thing, making money. No social or political goals.
Okay, and what about the bigger picture? The role of government in the economy. Do they want a more hands-off approach there too?
They do. Free markets are the best way to create jobs, they say. Get the government out of the way, let businesses do their thing. Regulations just stifle job creation, make it harder for companies to compete.
So less regulation, more freedom for businesses, the classic free market approach.
That's it, a level playing field, but no micromanaging the economy, no picking winners and losers.
Okay, so they're shaking things up at the Department of Labor. How about transportation? Any big ideas there?
They focus on the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, the agency that regulates air travel.
Oh, yeah, the FAA.
They want to either separate the FAA from the Department of Transportation or change how it's funded, make it more efficient, less political.
So a more independent FAA.
Exactly. And they want the FAA to get with the times, embrace new technologies like those digital towers that can control multiple airports from one place using cameras and sensors.
Modernize air traffic control, make it more efficient.
That's it. They think the FAA needs to be more forward-looking.
Okay, and last but not least, how about veterans? What do they want to do with the VA, the Department of Veterans Affairs?
They want to see a more veteran-centric VA. Empower veterans to make their own healthcare decisions. Focus on quality and choice.
So give veterans more control over their own care?
Exactly. They're not happy with how the VA works now. Too bureaucratic, not responsive enough to what veterans need.
What kind of changes are they thinking about?
They want to fix those misaligned VA facilities. The ones that are in the wrong places or costing too much. Maybe close some of those, partner with private hospitals and clinics.
Makes sense.
And they want the VA to use telehealth more, make it easier for veterans to get care no matter where they live.
So modernize the VA, make it more efficient, more responsive to veterans' needs.
That's the goal. They think veterans deserve the best possible care.
Okay, so we've covered a lot here, from the gig economy to air traffic control to veterans' health care. It's clear they have a whole blueprint for how a conservative government should handle domestic policy. But there's still a couple of big areas we haven't gotten to. Trade and those independent regulatory agencies, the ones that have so much power over our lives.
Oh, yeah, those are big ones. And they've got some strong opinions there, too.
Okay, I'm ready. Let's dive in. Okay, let's tackle trade. It's been in the news a lot lately, tariffs, trade wars, all that. What's their take on trade in this book?
Well, they actually offer a couple of different perspectives, which
Okay.
I think is interesting, kind of reflects the debate going on within the conservative world.
Oh, okay.
You've got someone like Peter Navarro, he was a big trade advisor to Trump, right? He's super hawkish on China, thinks we need to protect American jobs and industries.
America first,
Yeah.
that kind of thinking.
Yeah, economic nationalism is what he calls it. He thinks China's been cheating for years, costing us jobs, hurting our manufacturing, and tariffs, he sees those as a necessary tool, to fight back.
Okay, so that's one side. But I'm guessing there's another view presented as well, the more traditional free trade argument.
You got it.
Oh.
There's a chapter by Dan Lassman, he's an economist, and he's more hands-off. Tariffs just hurt consumers, he says, drive up prices. Free trade's the best way to go, even if it's not perfect.
The classic debate, protectionism versus free trade. So where do the authors themselves land? Navarro or Lassman?
They seem to lean more towards the free trade side, but they do recognize that we have to deal with unfair practices, especially from China. They actually say we should get rid of those tariffs that were put on Chinese goods a few years ago. They say those have hurt us more than they've helped.
So they think free trade, with some safeguards against cheating, is the way to go.
Yeah, that's the idea. Protectionism, they argue, it usually backfires. Higher prices, less competition, slower growth.
Yeah.
And they're big on working with our allies, team up to promote free and fair trade around the world. See that as a way to counter China.
Interesting. So a more nuanced view of trade, not just black and white. Okay, let's move on to those independent regulatory agencies, the ones that everyone loves to hate, so powerful, unelected, unaccountable. What do they say about them?
Oh, they've got a lot to say, and they're not afraid to suggest some pretty radical changes. Starting with the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, they regulate all the airwaves, radio, TV, internet, all that.
The FCC, yeah, they're in the news a lot. All those debates about net neutrality and censorship online.
Exactly. And the authors, they want a more aggressive FCC, one that's willing to take on those tough issues head on. Online censorship, the security threats from companies like TikTok and Huawei.
Oh, yeah, those are big ones.
And they're worried about American businesses helping China, with their AI ambitions.
So national security, censorship, and making sure China doesn't get a leg up technologically. A lot on their plate.
They think the FCC's got a crucial role to play, protecting our country and our economy in this digital age. Now, how about the FEC, the Federal Election Commission? They're supposed to make sure elections are fair, enforce all those campaign finance laws.
The FEC, huh?
They're adamant that the FEC has to stay neutral, truly bipartisan. No one should be using it as a weapon against their political opponents.
So no trying to silence your rivals through the FEC.
Exactly. They see a fair FEC as key to people trusting our elections. Now, they also get into the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission.
The ones who handle antitrust, consumer protection, right?
That's them. And get this, they actually suggest that maybe the Department of Justice should be the one handling antitrust. They think having a separate agency like the FTC might be unconstitutional.
Wow, really? That's a big claim, saying the FTC might not even be legal.
It is, yeah. Shows how much they distrust unelected bureaucrats, They want the executive branch, the president, accountable to the voters to be the one enforcing those laws.
Okay, what about the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission? They're the ones who police the stock market.
Right. They want to reform the SEC, make it more transparent, make sure everyone gets a fair hearing, and make sure it's promoting investment, so the economy can grow. They even suggest merging a couple of other financial regulatory agencies into the SEC, the PCAOB and FINRA.
Streamline things, make it more efficient.
Exactly. Less bureaucracy, always the goal. And then there's the CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau.
The one that was created after the 2008 financial crisis.
That's the one. It's supposed to protect consumers from predatory lenders, all that.
It's been pretty controversial. People say it's too powerful.
The authors agree. Too much power, not enough accountability, and they think it's politically biased. They want to see its power cut back, make sure it's not hurting the financial industry.
So a less activist CFPB.
That's it, focused on protecting consumers, not pushing a political agenda. Well, we've covered a lot of ground today. Mandate for leadership, it's really packed with ideas, from family values to national defense, to trade to regulatory reform. It's a big, bold vision for how a conservative president could change the government. It is, and it really shows you what they believe in. Limited government, individual freedom, free markets, a strong military. Not everyone's going to agree with all of it, but it definitely gets you thinking.
It does. It makes you think about what role you want the government to play in your life, what kind of country we want to be. And that's what we're all about here on The Deep Dive, getting you to think about these big questions. What are the challenges we face? What should the government do? How do we balance freedom and responsibility?
Big questions, no easy answers.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
keep thinking about it. Read the book for yourself. Talk to your friends and family about it. The future of our country depends on the choices we make, all of us together.
And as always, thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive. We hope you found this exploration of Mandate for Leadership informative and thought-provoking. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.